When great leadership seems in such short supply, can an African experiment championed by the legendary Archbishop Desmond Tutu offer any hope?
It is believed that you are people who can make a difference.
We share the same dream, and those who will come after us will also share that dream.
25 remarkable people promise to dedicate their talents to transforming the continent. Over the course of 5 months, they'll undergo intensive coaching in South Africa and the UK and have to show the results of their leadership on the ground.
Daddy, give me the victim.
It's uniquely designed to provoke,
I can't stand anymore listening to all this.
test,
We don't have to be friends to work together.
Okay. Disgusting, yeah? And what else?
unite,
I find it very special. You're special.
and empower them.
We can influence which road our nations go.
Power to the people.
My mind's racing with all sorts of dangerous thoughts.
I feel so challenged and motivated to go and start changing the world.
But reaching for great heights will mean addressing taboos
There's a bully here.
and facing their innermost conflicts.
I can do this.
Is it okay for me to put my life on the line when I have the responsibility of these children?
For some, it's an experience that will alter their sense of direction in life. Among them, will we find Africa's leaders of tomorrow? These are Tutu's children. So far on Tutu's children, after their uplifting South African retreat at Montfleur, the young leaders headed for home feeling inspired. And back to the harsher realities of African leadership. Ziad stumbles into the siege of Tripoli airport. Our Nigerians lose colleagues in an air disaster which unites the country in grief. Mema evacuates his family from Mali after a military coup. And in South Africa, a police shooting of striking miners threatens the peace. Halfway through their leadership course, some are beginning to find what they were looking for.
Being part of the bubble you live in, but it is definitely within the continent and will affect... Unity is definitely possible, but it's also the only way out.
I almost feel a bit embarrassed about wondering whether I would feel part of the group based on the experiences this week.
Let me quickly explain. You're a banker.
The people we met, the chemistry of the group, the space we're given for introspection and thinking. I find there was an element of magic.
I find it very special. You're special.
Montfleur was a bubble, but I absolutely enjoy that bubble.
It takes the vision of one person.
But quiet entrepreneur Liddy withdraws from the process to receive an award in the United States for her contribution to literacy in Rwanda.
I have to step up and take this opportunity to share all the leadership development training that I had.
Looking younger.
4 months now since Cape Town, and the group have reunited for the final part of their leadership coaching, this time in England. Shortly after arriving in high heels, health expert Dr. Farai became a patient.
I tripped on the stairs, and then I fell, and then my foot swelled up, and it was painful, and then I went to the hospital, and they did an x-ray, and there were 2 broken bones in my foot.
While Cape Town was all about examining tough African issues, now in Oxford, they'll be pushed to analyse themselves.
We deliberately try to push people out of their comfort zone because that's when the true learning comes through.
With its towering tradition of educating world leaders, Oxford University hosts Tutu's children at its business school. British business guru Charles Hampden Turner is creator of dilemma theory, which says the key to success lies in embracing the very thing you find most uncomfortable. On their first day back together, he faces them with the most unpleasant of prospects.
The challenge is to die in ways that your message always lives. Martin Luther King said famously, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." He said that about 10 hours before he was assassinated.
So, are the young leaders also prepared to risk their lives? Though Dr. Hampden Turner doesn't know it yet, one of them already has.
Can we somehow die in a way that makes us immortal, that allows us our influence to live on?
Oh, sorry. Can I just jump in here?
Yes.
Because this for me is a really big issue. The whole idea that perhaps you have to be sacrificed in that effort to save a people or a nation. But I think Nelson Mandela has shown us, and his conduct has shown us, that you can have a great hero who perhaps is not a martyr. So perhaps the challenge is to be able to live rather than to be a martyr.
No, I agree entirely with you. I mean, the thing to do is to live your life to the full. Even Martin Luther King says longevity has its place. Like everyone, I'd like to live a long life.
And to add to that, I mean, for me, Julie, the reason death is actually not important in the equation is because one of the critical things, I think, I mean, no matter how internally, these guys are feeling, they always have to put up this facade of bravery. I do not fear death, and in order to inspire other people. It's a risk that you have to take, and you have to pretend as if you do not fear. Meanwhile, deep down,
to die in ways. So I'm just concerned about, that capturing it as if, dying delivers the bigger message.
I think if you're spiritually very strong, your relationship to death is very different. And I don't think you actually fear death.
This isn't just another hypothetical scenario for Kenyan TV host and mother of 5, Julie.
In 2008, I called for peace after the post-election violence in Kenya, and several of us were put on a death list. So the death list went out, and we were called traitors to our community for calling for peace and saying that the election may not have been transparent. And a decision had to be made. I either continue to speak out or I be killed. And I think, sorry, I'm just talking from a very personal point of view. At that point, the country was collapsing, and I made a choice that whatever happened, I was going to speak for peace. And I had to look at my children and look at my husband and sit with my husband and have a discussion and say, is it okay for me to put my life on the line when I have the responsibility of these children? But I do think that as Africans, we have to stop taking it to the end of the journey. We have to get our communities to embrace a message without having to have martyrs and messiahs, and that's just the point I'm trying to make. So I do believe that these guys were all willing and stood up, but there was a personal cost, a cost on their families, and that's important also to recognize.
People seem to have come back with a renewed appetite for inconvenient truths, ready to get to the heart of what leadership is really going to mean, no matter how traumatic that may be. As a precondition of graduating as a Tutu Fellow, The mentors insist on a homework assignment designed to test whether the leaders can turn talk into action.
The second workshop, they must have at least defined a project, put a business plan together for that project, and started involving stakeholders in the project.
And so, across the continent, 25 social projects sprang up between May and August. Curiously, almost all the leaders drew on their childhood experiences in choosing a worthy cause.
It was quite a simple decision, actually, as to what I would do for my community project. You know, it was one of those things that I just have to do. This is where it all began for me. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
No, I'm okay, man.
I didn't know that you were still at the school.
No, I'm still here. It's quite a long time, eh?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. He was very vocal in the class. He was very active, participating. He was the highest in the class. He was very clever.
South African lawyer Ndumiso makes his project the rebuilding of the village high school, which first showed him a way out of poverty and the violence of the era. Like too many rural schools, it suffers from chronic neglect. Having made it to law school, then Oxford, and now the post of executive director, Ndumiso knows he's one of the lucky ones.
Looking at the class, it's just structurally unsound. There is nothing that can be done to salvage it. It has to be knocked down and rebuilt. I'll do whatever I can to actually rebuild my class of 1990. Yeah, it's quite sad. It's quite sad.
And Ndumiso, Mshiane needs 4 classrooms.
4 classrooms, yeah. Okay.
We need a laboratory. We need a library. We need water and electricity, as those things are basic towards providing quality education.
Well, I mean, it's a long list, but what I'm planning to do is on my next trip, I'm going to come with 1 or 2 of our engineers, because I'd like them to sort of do an assessment. I will do my best to actually try and fundraise, but going forward, we actually need to start setting very stiff targets.
He's passionate that his contribution to the school shouldn't just be in bricks and mortar, that building aspiration is also something he can help with.
I did everything that you're doing. I walked these hills. I drank amanzi from the stream down there below. I got where I am today because of your discipline. The world does not owe you anything. You have to be the master of your own destiny. Etinanda Township, where I lived, because we were young schoolboys, you know, we'd be used to carry weapons, stopping cars in roadblocks, siphoning fuel from them to make petrol bombs. I knew that I always wanted to, you know, get an education. That was my only chance out of the situation that I and my family were in. You know, that is where I actually fought what I believe was the sort of first round of my turnaround battles. The message that was coming through from the headmaster was very similar to the message that leaders like Nelson Mandela, you know, were preaching as well. Whenever you raise that clenched fist, you must always make sure that there's a piece of paper and a pen in your hand. Because when the dust settles, it's people with good education that will be able to take our country forward.
In another poor South African village, private investor Mark van Olst also has grand designs.
The question started with what is something that could really boost the local economy here? What are they consuming the most of every week? Chickens. So chickens are really the key to their local economy.
Mark aims to unite struggling chicken farmers in this region under a single brand. He is here to convince them that collective buying power will reduce costs and that selling chickens after slaughter will leave them with more profit.
We sell it live.
You always sell it live.
Yes.
And would it help if there was an abattoir in the area?
Yes, if there could be an abattoir, that could be a superb idea, because we are not able to sell live chicken or the whole stock, and it takes time to get rid of the whole stock if you sell them live.
So the chickens eat up your profits while you're waiting to sell them.
Yes.
I grew up in, what would be a normal, I guess, white South African household. My mother was a school teacher. My dad was a businessman, as long as I can remember. We were dropping off food in poor areas. We were, taking second-hand furniture to houses that didn't have it over the weekends. And that instilled in me, something special about the gift of giving. We do a competition. Maybe we run it at the schools. Get the schools to also enter the competition to design the brand of the chicken. This community consumes $50 million worth of chickens a year. $35 million leaves the community for good because they buy chickens from another community. If we kept that $35 million in the community for less than the sort of $1 million that I've raised to make this thing work, I think it's a fantastic deal. You spend $1 million, you get $35 million. I'd invest in that any day.
For sure.
Advising each other.
Ever the activist, Mark can't resist the opportunity to turn his chicken project into a vehicle for social change.
You just need 2 or 3 people that have done it themselves, that have built something big to set off a revolution of entrepreneurship. And if you ask me what my real objective of getting involved in this is, that's what it is. That's the activism in business, is to become an entrepreneur. And that's what this country needs more desperately than a better government. Tycoon, a chicken tycoon. I think it's something that people will talk about when it works.
A world away from chickens and schools, entrepreneur Swadi develops her social project, along with fellow Tutu participant Ipeleng, CEO of a marketing firm, at her Johannesburg home.
So we're building this platform called Kibo, which is really women helping other women excel. And it's building a support system to build the new generation of African women leaders. We want to profile, the women into types of leaders, key deliverables, to share best practices, being that agent of change, that it's the women who are the visionary, try to instill their passion.
Ordinary women doing extraordinary things.
Performance, image, and exposure.
Top executive positions over 12 years with global conglomerate General Electric gave Swadi a taste for results.
We still have a lot to do for African women. A lot. And at all levels. I think we're underrepresented in government. I think we're underrepresented in the private sector. I think we have a lot of rights issues at, a rural level. There is just so much to do, and still we're the backbone of the continent. And I wish that with Kibo we actually have a little contribution to that pyramid of needs. I don't think that if men were to face the same challenges as we face, they would survive.
The young CEOs agree to use their own businesses to get their women's empowerment project off the ground.
We really have a lean model where it's basically the two of us, plus we've each assigned some time from our staff to help with the project. Happier women create happier children.
Exactly.
And create a better Africa as well at the end of the day.
On the opposite end of the continent, Tunisian activist and media boss Dr. Ziad returns to his driving passion from the days before the revolution, public health.
It took us a long time, almost 20 years and generations of activists and generations of people to get where we are today. The Tunisian HIV Association was created in the early 90s. And in an environment that was not extremely supportive towards HIV. So this is where people come to get help. Then we'll start talking about their issues, show them that they are not alone. So this kit has 2 syringes, 2 condoms and some lubricant in it. So this kit will be given to everyone who is part of any vulnerable groups to prevent the expansion of HIV in these communities.
Helping develop an AIDS NGO isn't the obvious thing to do in a country like Tunisia, even for a doctor.
When I was 11 years old, I lost my uncle. I really had a strong relationship with him. He died when he was 25, and he died of HIV/AIDS. That was the biggest shock in my childhood. If we knew and if he knew, then we would have done something. You know, there was some medicines at that time. There were things that we could have done to prevent or at least to keep him going till science improves. And that's the sad part, that we did not know, he didn't tell us. We couldn't say a proper goodbye, I feel, and we were in such a shock. And things could have been very different and then hence why also after medicine, I went to public health.
Having worked across Africa, Dr. Ziad has come to believe that activism is what ultimately saves lives. And his project aims to turn the small NGO into a regional lobby base for AIDS in Africa.
When I reflect and think back about the suffering that people who were living with HIV had to go through in the 80s, who at that time did not get a proper clinical care, whose disease was not understood, I feel really proud. A center like this in Tunisia today is like a dream coming true.
Now in Oxford, they each report back on progress so far.
The biggest impact we can have is actually by trapping our income in the community. You know, instead of 700 million rand leaving the community every year, we can cut it to half by growing our own stuff. That's much more than any NGO will ever bring to this community.
The school was built in 1985, and predominantly it was built by the local community and so forth. I mean, the gentleman who was so-called the chief constructor is still alive. We call him Babu Ngumalo. He's built a few houses in the village. Not all of them are straight.
This is not a product or an event, it's a process. It's about going back into your world, making a contribution.
We're modernizing in the Eastern Cape, so the African rain dance has taken on a new twist, so I'd like you to practice it. First, you get into the good Maasai position. Now you set out your sprinkler head, and now your sprinkler must start shooting, and now it must go.
Through encouraging them to learn more about their heritage and to get self-empowerment that would enable them to do more in their community.
These are the dreamers of great dreams.
"25 young Africans on a leadership scheme championed by Desmond Tutu have had to prove that they can translate talk into real change.
And I got where I am today because of a discipline. The world does not owe you anything.
But transforming the environment around you may turn out to be easier than transforming yourself.
You can have some wonderful people at school, some wonderful people at university. You all of a sudden get out there and you say, wow, what am I doing? How do I handle this? We concentrate on the age between 25 and 40. And we try to provide guidance for really good people who've shown this leadership potential to help them through that mid-career problem.
So what can a 400-year-old play reveal about how they should lead today in times of crisis?
Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or fill the wall up with our English dead. In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the actions of a tiger. Show us here the mettle of your pasture. Let us swear that you are worth your breeding, which I doubt not. For there is none of you so mean and base that have not noble lustre in your eyes. This game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge, cry, God for Harry, England, and St. George.
With this famously stirring speech, Shakespeare's Henry V, a young accidental leader, rallies his troops on the eve of battle. But how motivational are Tutu's children under pressure?
Do you understand the part of you that can make a problem worse? If you're going to be the most influential person in the room, you need to be sure that that influence is a good one.
Actor David Boyle helps them find out, with a method devised by his company, Olivier Mythodrama. Performing a set of exercises against the clock should bring out each person's instinctive leadership type: magician, great mother, good king, or warrior.
The great mother in me is the person who takes care of their people. And there's some sweeties there. If you want to, you can feed them to your partner.
I don't eat chocolates, so there's no feeling.
You can hold hands, whatever you like. Hug. You will be spontaneously creative, which means that you make something out of this material that you have never imagined before. That's the medicine woman or the magician in you. The good king is in his counting house, counting out his money, okay? And it's about making order. You are going to have 5 minutes to elect a leader amongst you and come up with the 3 most important characteristics for an African leader in 2012, this time. You've done it?
Yeah, we've done it.
Okay, good.
How can you do that?
Thank
That's
you.
not right, man.
Thank you. The warrior is just about action, it's about getting it done. This is the place of ruthless competition, and everyone here now is your enemy. There'll only be one winner here. No running, no physical contact. The winner of this game will be the person who has most paper at the end. Paper is acquired by stealing it from the enemy.
My tactic was to be nimble and just kind of move around and move, and yeah, so I think that was the technique, and then be aware of what was going on and at the same time, trying to catch people.
What happens when someone has a new suggestion?
Asked to pick out their dominant leadership type, Zied the Revolutionary sits among the good kings, entrepreneur Swadi with the warriors, and maverick investor Mark appears among the magicians. Businessman and lawyer Undemiso identifies with the nurturing mother. But the purpose of the task is to encourage them to compensate for those qualities which don't come naturally.
Think about which of these characters is your least favorite character. And please go to the corner that represents that character. Make your personal decision quickly. Go now.
Intriguingly, over a third of the leaders reject the nurturing great mother.
Oh no, I'm a warrior, my friend. I'm not a nurturer at all.
Now, this is the time. It's not a time to be polite, okay? This is not personal. It's archetypal. So I want you to put all the things up on this list that you don't like about this character.
Yeah, selfishness.
Don't be aggressive, Amy. Just saying.
And procrastinate.
And we'll begin with the Great Mother corner.
The group was very passionate about disliking the character, but we felt the character is too emotional, too personal, time-wasting, not efficient, fluffy, airy-fairy, weak, whining, complaining, sorry, making excuses, and totally irrational.
Seed with passion.
The warriors, aggressive, hostile, violent, pretentious, hating others, they may not even recognize that. Selfish, arrogant, devious, and dishonest. They want things now, and they concentrate on immediate gratification.
And of course, the warriors are saying, what's wrong with you? What's your problem? We're going to hear about the good king.
Too many rules, very, very boring and authoritarian.
Boring,
very boring.
So your traitor is the very thing you think you're good at. Because under pressure, you're going to overdo it. You're going to overplay it. As a leader of your team, you will probably notice the people who do things like you do more than the people who do things in the place that you're standing now. And those people will not get the acknowledgement and recognition that they deserve because it's not important to you. Calm seas do not a sailor make. When you're sailing the boat, and it's nice, the sun's up and the water's calm and you're the captain and you're running that ship, it's great. But you don't find out what you have as a captain until, what? Until the wind blows.
Contrary to his fears on the eve of the course 5 months previously, South African investor Mark van Olst has the acceptance of his peers and is by now at the very heart of the group.
It's interesting being a white person in South Africa today. I'd love to be able to say race didn't matter in this country, that color didn't matter, that we had achieved Martin Luther's dream, that people would be judged by the content of the character. But we're not there yet. I hope people will just see me for the fact that in my heart I'm an African. I've got no other place to go. This is where I live. This is my home. I almost feel a bit embarrassed about wondering whether I would feel part of the group based on the experiences this week.
But back to business in the conference room, and the good mood fragments as discussion turns to the issue of race. Archbishop Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission is held up internationally as a model of restorative justice and widely considered a saving grace of post-apartheid South Africa. But as the young leaders grapple with the sad reality that the Rainbow Nation is struggling, hidden fault lines appear.
They were bad apples in a bad barrel, right? And they took the flak for many bad apples, right? They did that with their maids at home watching the TV, right? And it was incredibly difficult for many people to watch. We thought we were going to be wiped out after that, right? And we were probably quite surprised by what I would call the very humanitarian response that the country dished out to whites at the time. But it hasn't gone away, right? And that's the problem now, is what will get us forgiveness, right? When will, let's say, those that weren't even part of that be absolved of the sins of their fathers?
For the 6 South Africans, this new climate of polarization brings back childhood memories of division and fear.
For instance, the kind of relationships that you and I have are an exception in South Africa. The truth, we are a divided society. We still pretty much live under the same conditions, of segregation that existed, so many years ago. And the question for me is, how do we, get the process going en masse so that we can have more people living the kind of vindicated lives that you and I live?
The majority of the poor in South Africa feel that the sense of dialogue with white people on the effects of apartheid, on crime, for instance, etc., that it has been closed.
So would an apology help heal the rifts?
What can I say about it, right? What can anyone who's under my age, and I'm not abdicating myself from it, but it's not a genuine apology if it comes from me. It's not a genuine apology if it comes from, let's say my father, who was what you would probably call a liberal, and those sorts of things. So we need to do it fast. Right? If that's what is required.
Born on opposite sides of history, the two South Africans find their new friendship tested.
In my humble opinion, forgiveness is the prerogative of the wronged. And one of the things which actually pains me in South Africa is the white supremacy attitude is still there. People believe that forgiveness can be demanded. And you can actually put time frames.
Demiso, I think that, yes, you can't put a timeline on forgiveness, but let me tell you what will happen if you fast forward this movie without putting some sort of sense of urgency to it.
I mean, I think the situation is actually much more complex than we actually painted out.
But healing is an active process. It's not a passive process.
You know, Swati, I'm not going to respond to some of the issues you raised.
What do you say to a white person honestly going ahead, trying to maintain the standards of living?
I think you talked earlier
of their own.
The Jewish people did this, right?
You can distinguish between some racist people.
You know, beyond the color, it's more.
You know, maybe we haven't really healed.
Shucks, man, it was a terrible thing. Can we now move on?
I don't actually have to forgive in order to move on.
It may be the foundation stone of Tutu and Mandela's Africa, but it seems forgiveness isn't granted freely by this generation. And though the debate goes on, Mark is left without the response he needs. Having by now shared the kind of frank discussion most people have only with lifelong friends, this isn't the only underpinning of the scheme the leaders throw into question.
We, young African leaders, reject that notion of African leadership.
When he came out and he was
Three-quarters of the way through their African leadership course, it's a curious turn of events. Not least for the visiting speaker, head of the UN delegation in South Africa, Dr. John Ohiorenyuan.
To start there. Why? What's wrong with the notion of African leadership?
Africa isn't a country.
Leadership is leadership, and the challenges are similar. Terrorism, human trafficking, narco-trafficking.
I don't think we had one conversation around African leadership.
I find as much difference between a South African and an Ivorian than between an Ivorian and a French.
To reject the notion of an African leadership is to reject the notion of an authentic African culture.
It's not that I reject African leadership, but what I reject is the inability of the African leadership style to transform itself and adapt itself to the new world. Therefore, by default, our generation start looking at the other style that we have been trained under, which is the Western leadership.
A clean break from the past for the young leaders seems a liberating prospect.
I think we've been deceived by our elders who, if we look at the generation just above us, who has been talking about African leadership, but in reality, you're just stealing from your population, you're keeping power for yourself, you're the living examples of wrong and bad leadership. What is different from those times we were colonized? Now it's basically the exploitation of us by our own people.
With their mixed heritage and education in Europe and the United States, how representative are Tutu's children of their countrymen? And does it matter? If they are prepared to be the change makers the continent needs. Some hours after their heated discussion,
Can we now move on?
I don't actually have to forgive in order to move on.
a more reflective Ndemiso decides to reaffirm his friendship with Mark.
We came out of that and then we went and, had food, which is sort of a bit of a leveler. Some of us, I sat on the table with Mark and Swati and we continued the discussion. Whether we're black, orange, green, or blue, we need to pull together to build a successful nation. And I get worried when people see themselves as victims, because what tends to follow after that is option B, if things do not work out for me in South Africa, then perhaps I should be thinking about, moving elsewhere. It's something that the continent cannot afford. So it's important for me to actually reach out to him and also, in a way, help him understand that he's actually not alone.
They'll soon be on their way to London for the final 3 days of their leadership course.
Oh, this is cool. We've got to have photos done like this.
Oxford undergrad.
But the young Africans won't be leaving Oxford without a taste of the classic Oxford experience in the 13th century chapel of Balliol College. And they're not just here to listen.
How do we start together? How do I inspire the specialists, the guys that I'm surrounded by? When do they need the leadership?
How do they lead without words? Danish conductor Peter Hanke helps them find out.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
For such great talkers, this was never going to be easy.
You're a very sensitive guy, but it doesn't hurt your decision-making ability.
Keeping pace with creative and independent-minded businesswoman Swadi is a challenge.
Okay, very good. You feel at home here, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Definitely.
It's interesting. So you're having a great time.
Yeah, I am.
That's great for you. Can you also make your organization have a great time? Yeah. We are lacking something that might also be a little challenge for you. Consistency in your decisions. Boring consistency and predictability might help. It can be quite useful and liberating for your organization. It didn't become boring at all. Yeah, very good. Let's just have a time out here. How's this? What's your reaction?
It's lots of responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. Putting yourself at stake as a human being, touching other people's aspirations, skills, inspiring them, giving them something they didn't know they possessed, lifting up the complete organization with your actions. I think there's an interesting balance between sensitivity and decision-making that is probably easier for this group to hit that balance or that integration than we might have seen before.
Can Loya Ndumiso, never one to express his emotions openly, create harmony?
There's a cautious sort of trying Am I on the right direction, the right path? But you are open-minded enough to include your group in this search, which is very inspiring. It's not interesting for us that our leader is a very controlling person. It's much more interesting that it's a searching guy that invites us in this search. You're a nice guy. You're not in command mode. You can stretch it a little more without harming anybody. There's a little sort of secrecy around you. Can you expose it so we have the opportunity to follow you to the end of the world? Very well done. Thank you very much.
The experience of inspiring others with their actions brings Ndumiso and Mark together.
It felt like standing in front of young birds with open beaks in the beginning. Waiting for your command, waiting for you to put the worm in it.
You don't actually have to know everything to be able to lead. With the limited information, you can actually get going. And by just inspiring other people to come with you, you actually are going to get more as you go along.
And the only way you can measure your impact as a leader in that situation is to see the eyes go from of the singers from concerned looking to them actually started to smile and sparkle. And whatever I did right or wrong, just seeing a few of those sparkling eyes really made it feel worth it.
In the final episode,
African takeaways, yeah?
the young leaders hit the big city where their goodwill is pushed to the limit.
Disgusting, yeah? And what else? Just go and do it. Just go and do it.
They walk the corridors of power and tackle the charge of elitism head on.
We are definitely an elite group.
I don't think there's any chance of our group becoming elitist.